Hello, sir. Hello.
Hello, how are you? Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. Sir.
Okay.
Good evening.
Good
evening, sir.
Good evening. How are you?
And good morning to all the participants and everyone viewing this over YouTube. Well, this is the second day of Genesis, so presented by Hyrek, and we are just starting the day today with our star speaker, Mr. Padman Ramankutty. And I'll just give a brief introduction about you, and then maybe we can start the session. I'll collate the questions via YouTube and this link. and you can take it up as they come later on. Just give me 2 minutes and we'll start. Before starting Sir's introduction, I'd just like to play a small video by our title sponsors.
Post a new job and receive responses within 5 minutes.
Recording in progress.
Ready? Is the ad playing? Should I start, sweetie?
So just let the video get played completely, and then I'll just introduce you, and then you can start.
Yeah, okay. I'm not able to see anything. So, all right. All right.
Are you not able to see my screen?
No, just you.
Oh, okay. I just played the video without screen share. I'm so sorry. I'll just start the video again.
As I can see their last active time as well. Post a new job and receive responses within 5 minutes. For a verified recruiter, posting a job can be done with a click of a button. Recruiters don't have to wait for candidates to apply. Candidate profiles are recommended based on the job post, and recruiters can start communicating with the recommended candidates immediately after posting the job. Privacy of the users is also protected. Personal information like phone number, CVs are shared only with consent. The communication can either be initiated by the recruiter or the candidate. In my case, you can see within 5 minutes of posting the job, the recruiter could chat directly, receive responses quickly, and even schedule interviews with the candidates. Within a few minutes, the recruiter can start expecting more candidates to view the job post and reach out to them by initiating a chat conversation. Since Hirect is mobile first, responses pour in any time of the day as most people are within the vicinity of their phone. A few hours later, as you can see here, a product manager job post was added by me last night, and by morning I have already received 15 plus chat requests from job seekers. You can see that my feed is full of product managers from top institutes and companies as matched by the algorithm. I'm able to initiate a chat with them and receive a response quickly, as I can see their last active time as well. Recruiters can receive responses from job seekers irrespective of the time of day or even at night, as Hirect is mobile first, and this makes it very accessible to the users. Direct chat, mobile accessibility, instant response, matching algorithm, secured privacy makes it 5 times better product for recruiters.
That was the video, sir. So I'll just introduce you and then we start the sessions. So Mr. Padman Ramankutty here is the managing director at Accenture. He is an experienced CEO with a demonstrated history of working in information technology and services industry. A strong business development professional, skilled in IT strategy, professional services, IT leadership, management, SAP ERP, and supply chain technologies. Additionally, he has founded around 25 startups and has been an investor on his own since long. Now the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. I know it's an early Saturday for most of you, so let me get through the presentation. You have disabled my participation on the screen. How do I share? I can't hear you. Sweetie, I cannot hear you.
Yeah. So you can try sharing now. I have changed the settings.
Okay. Desktop. Gosh. I got lots of privacy settings.
Are you facing any difficulty in sharing screen, sir?
Yeah.
You can send over the presentation to me. I can share it if you want.
Okay. A pretty large presentation. Hold on 1 second. Let me check again why. Yeah, I think it's now able to share. Can you see?
Yes, sir. The screen is visible.
Okay. Very good. Good morning, everybody. I know Saturday mornings in an MBA school is not that easy. Must have partied last night. So, welcome. I think the topic I would like to talk about is not digital wave, because that is happening. That is table stakes. I think business is changing. It's not as usual what we have done further. I think the bigger thing is the supply chain revolution that is going to come, both at the technical level, at the algorithmic level, at the technology underpinnings, infrastructure, as well as the business model. So everything you think about in supply chain is going to change, and change very, very rapidly in the next 5 years. What we have seen so far, what we were working towards in the just before pre-pandemic, that is all out the door. So that, in a sense, is what we are going to talk about. I'd like, you can stop me anytime, ask questions, ask experiences. So I'm Padman Ramankutty. I'm an MD at Accenture. Accenture, I have been there just the last 3 years. I have worked in supply chain since 20 some years, 30 years almost. Started two companies. One is Intrigo, which Accenture bought. We were the supply chain integrated business planning leaders in the market in the world of SAP. And prior to that, I had founded a company called Bristlecone, which I sold to Mahindra and Mahindra back in 2003. Both the companies were focused on supply chain. And prior to that, I was at SAP and helped develop the advanced planning and optimization products. So that is kind of my background. I'm kind of into a lot of soccer. So all you Calcutan fans may like that. So, and into photography. That is what I do for my downtime. So the supply chains have been around forever. We used to call it trade routes. We used to call it, medieval trade routes and camel, and armies have built. So on the top right is a supply chain logistics model of how the Napoleon's army went into Moscow and how they returned. It's a classic example of a logistics play of number of people who went and equipment that went with that supply chain. So supply chain is a newer moniker of old trade routes and trading merchants that used to move goods from one place to another using the dhows or the junks in the old days. And supply chains are actually what created empires. The people who could move stuff across the oceans and to buffer that stuff, whether it is food or whether it is gold, they were able to get an inordinate amount of power within those experiences. So it is something that is not new, but I would venture a guess that we have all introduced ourselves and seen in history books about trade routes and things of that nature. So when people talk about supply chains, what is a modern version of it? Why are we sticking to it? That's kind of what you should think about, right? So one invention in the mid-70s, one real invention brought the world closer. And if you would look at it, the invention is the shipping container. Literally, it brought the idea of moving goods in a standardized fashion from any part of the world to any part of the world. Before the containerization, there was an inherent inefficiency in moving goods and services across continents. Because of the super container model and the container ship, this is what has revolutionized and brought the world closer. And this is the reason why you can get mango in the winter in San Francisco, even though it is not in season. This is why you can get walnut in southern India, even though it doesn't grow there, right? This is the fundamental reason why supply chains have become extremely efficient, because we have postponed and delayed and time shifted everything. And this made the whole world come closer because of this environment, right? So what has fundamentally changed is the consumer's behavior. Consumer became more demanding of wanting this food or the products in packages filled up, ready to be consumed, even though it was not native to the place, right? This also made producers rethink their supply chain, meaning instead of making it in America or in the Europe, they started looking for Asian countries, lower cost countries, in order to become a little bit more efficient and to introduce profits. And this containerization and this demanding consumer was increasing the velocity of supply chain across the world. Whether we moved goods and services from China to here or from Mexico to here in the California region, our needs and our wants increased substantially more. And that actually became more demanding, and it introduced waste and it introduced a lot of inefficiency. So we started making it a very efficient supply chain by introducing algorithms, by measuring the demand to a finite level, and to start predicting that demand before the supply even was shipped out of China. So that is why linear supply chains and the classical model of demand planning, supply planning, production planning, scheduling, of all of these things, logistics, inbound, outbound, people started fragmenting. When the first container was introduced, all of that coordination, when it moved from China or India to the Western countries, through Africa, through the Suez, was coordinated by small companies with paper and pen called freight forwarders, shipping agents. These are the people who moved your container, and there was nothing digital about it. So as over the last 20 years, what we have seen is a digitization of all of the technologies by these small companies. Still, it was an orchestration of a supply chain, except that we are still doing it in a traditional fashion. We would go measure the consumer behavior and tell the producer, this is how much we want. And then the producer goes to a big facility wherever in the world, amasses that material, consumer stuff, and builds it and brings it out. And as we tighten this, people in certain industries, automobile, high tech, made this a finely tuned orchestra of violin players. Think about it. That it was very, very tuned, it was very efficient, and we never cared about the paper and the packaging, the oil field, or any of those things, as long as it satisfied our needs. We didn't care about the environment or the planet. So rampant consumerization was partly a result of that containerization. This, in fact, is why the linear chains that we used to do in the 90s and even 2000, where we measured demand planning and said, so and so many people want laptops, and so many laptops need this number of chips. All of those disaggregation of the demand and the calculation of supply became very much a big exercise for most people. So in this process, I had the opportunity to help build the APO product at SAP in the late 90s and early 2000. And we were focused on supply chain planning as a what I would call as a practice to calculate and make forecast accuracy or supply efficiency or supply variability more efficient in companies. Meanwhile, companies were also fragmenting. So everything they used to make in the in-house now became outsourced. So all of a sudden, you had an orchestration across multiple parties with multiple systems. And so you needed to do a lot of data collection. So that led to a lot of tech changes. Technology like planning algorithms, We are starting to use iLog primitives or MATLABs or Cplex algorithm to create a linear supply chain, which started with demand, supply, production, logistics, vehicle scheduling, distribution, all of those plans. But as we became good at it, the consumer changed their behavior, especially the consumer in the tech world started demanding individual things. So it became a supply chain of not many people, it became a supply chain of one. So you could place the order for a laptop, and the laptop for you would come from China or Hong Kong direct to you. So this introduced new business model, because once the laptop comes to you, you started buying an Adobe system. You didn't need a CD, you needed it downloaded. So different new business models emerged and different types of competitors emerged, right? So all of a sudden, the phone, which was a very small wireless event, a brick, became a smartphone, and you started consuming over there. Then this all started changing the value chain, and people who are significantly good at this value chain and orchestration across multiple parties, across the supply chain, became the best in the business. Not because they had the best product, but because they were operationally very good, they could get it. And so that gave them an advantage. If they also had the best product and their supply chain was very efficient, they started getting what one would call rather unfair advantage and unfair market share. So supply chains became the weapon by which you could actually increase your market share, and you could conquer new lands and new territories, just like in the old days, right? Except you are now operating globally, and you could move into Asia or move into Africa with the same products or similar product at cheaper prices, and you could compete than if you had always operated in the US. So the technical challenge, because the consumer started in the 90s, late 90s and early mid 2000s, started demanding individual products. The value chain that was built over the last 20 years started breaking. And what we are seeing is the supply chain needs to become customer centric. Almost every customer is willing to walk out if they don't find the expected stuff with your products. So what we are saying is, luckily, we are able to capture data, be it point of sale, be it order entry system, be it service-centric system, and we can optimize how we are building to the customer. Okay, so customers started changing. And this introduced what Professor Howley calls a bullwhip effect. Bullwhip, meaning the information that a consumer at the front end said, I like this pair of glasses, or I like this earphone or headphones, then somebody else chooses different. The entire supply chain had to amplify in order to meet that particular demand for that particular consumer. This actually is one of in the late 2000 timeframe, last decade, 2005 to 2010, there's an immense focus. If you were in consumer electronics, or like I was working with Nike, we were focused on the consumer and how to improve our supply chain to meet the consumer. Not a group of customers, but an individual consumer. That also made our supply chain very thin and fragile. meaning for that one person or for that one group of people, we were building a very super efficient supply chain back to the manufacturing facility. That was what was in place till 2019. And the interesting thing was, because we had a linear supply chain, like a product like APO or a product like I2 was very coarse level calculation. They were calculating very significantly large number of demand planning, supply planning, and aggregating coarse data. So we were overly relied on third parties' asset networks. So because individuals, companies didn't have anything of their own, they were dependent on third party to deliver, ship, and do the logistics. And we saw the rise of Amazon in that area. Prologis, the company that has built the largest distribution network, supporting e-commerce. So while the order entry mechanisms all moved digital, the supply chain remained analog in lots of places. So, and it had this fragmented problem, because when you take an inbound logistics of products like phones coming from China, or an outbound logistics of your products going to the consumer, they had to go through third-party transportation, they had to go to third-party warehouse, they had to go through freight forwarders. And that data was, while it was good in the slow supply chain of the 80s and the 70s, it became inherently a hindrance for consumers, because for the producers, because the consumers did not want to wait anymore, and so they shifted. So what we tend to do is we always try to fix everything with technology at this time, right? So we had an aging infrastructure, we had an analog coordination of the supply chain with freight forwarders and ports and logistics handlers. We had an efficient ordering system. So the ordering system for the consumer was fast, but rest of it was slow. So we compensated by calculating inventory and hoarding inventory through the system. And that supply chain actually could not keep up. So parts of the supply chain was digital, parts of the supply chain was analog, and some parts of the supply chain was pure manual, meaning if the person in that port was not there, you couldn't get the supply chain working. So while this was going on, we needed a true consumer-centric model. So we had to think about how to classify our consumers. So at Nike, we would look at it in the terms of how many, is it a basketball player, is it a football athlete? Every person who comes in, what are they looking at? How do we personalize this? How do we think about treating them intimately so that we can get and glean ideas on how to sell to them, how to promote the product to them? So the orchestration of the goods and services needed to be much, much more prevalent and fair in the front of the house. But in the back of the house, it was a big scramble of creating planning algorithms and stuff like that. Okay. Disruption came in this times, not just from individuals like you and I buying on the web, but it also came from product innovations like the smartphones, while we used to have 2-in-1s and 3-in-1s type of models, the music industry disintegrated to delivering digital stuff for the people on the device, right? So everything that could have a digitization aspect or a digitalization aspect got stripped. And the consumer kept changing behaviors. And that behavior change had a massive impact on supply chain, delivery, product creation, product promotion, and all of those things. So in the US, supply chain today is a very, very hot topic, starting from the president's office to all the way to your neighborhood because of the reality today. We have 75 ships, cargo containers, sitting outside the port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, able to deliver. And this is very simply, everybody thinks it's because the port is backed up. The port is backed up from a coronavirus pandemic point of view, but not necessarily at that level. There are a couple of things that one needs to know. In the container world, we used to pack enough goods into one container and say that container is going to an electronics shop delivery, and that container is to rotate out and go back to China in 1 or 2 days. With the pandemic, what happened is that container now carrying goods and services goes to the Best Buy electronics shop, and that person there is not available, so it goes to a different warehouse to deliver. And so the delay in every container at every port, everywhere in the world, is what has caused a significant delay in the flow of goods because the packaging and the containerization. So ships are going back empty because the containers are sitting for 8 days or 10 days at different sites. So if you really trace the mathematical problem, it is almost like when you're in a free-flowing traffic, if somebody changes a lane, you'll get a delay of 15 minutes because of one person in a free-flowing traffic in LA, if he switches lanes, and it could delay the entire flow. That is the kind of delay that we are experiencing because every container that is distributed and is off of the network and doesn't come back in the time within that network has challenged us to back up on the port. The supply chain is working because we have ships and containers and products. It's just not efficient or effective, primarily because it was a highly tuned, efficient model, and it needed to become an effective model rather than being product-centric or volume-centric. It needed to get the stuff in. But once it got to the port, we could not get anything out. So what we have done is we have hit the worst storm, the perfect storm, as they call it. All three things came in it. The pandemic, lack of food, products, labor, warehouse space, every known thing that can go wrong has gone wrong. And supply chain used to be focused on cost, not on acquisition of customers or anything. And product finally, now it is, if you don't have supply chain, you cannot grow. So all of a sudden, the CEO and the people in the manufacturing have gotten a seat at the table. Now they can do. So what some companies like Walmart or Target have done is they have bought their own ships and their own containers to get control of the flow of goods for them between Asia and the US. So all we are starting to see is a vertical integration, because in times of uncertainty, when it is under your control, you are looking like a genius. So much so, if you look at American Eagle Outfitters, which is a company that is selling T-shirts and clothes, they have bought Outlook Logistics, not Outlook, it's Outpost Logistics, I think, in Boston, which is a warehouse management truck transportation company, to supplement their supply chain. So they are taking control of their supply chain, very much so. I see some chats here. Do I have to stop? Can I come to it at the end of the
Yeah, you can finish your presentation and then you can address all the questions in the end.
So the supply chain office, chief supply chain officer today is a COO or a growth officer, having control and having ways to handle is the most important job, if I would say, because they also look at the demand side. They're not just the supply chain. So their span of control in most companies is across the spectrum. So, for example, my friends at Clorox, where I have done quite some work, during the pandemic, they grew fast not because they had product, their manufacturing is local, meaning US, but because everybody wanted their product. So now they are engaged into reorganizing and rethinking how to become a highly successful supply chain company. We had done supply chain planning for them before, but now we are doing the complete infrastructure. So individual packs, individual consumers can be satisfied, as well as Walmart or Target or Amazon. So that's kind of one of the things that we are going to see coming out of this supply chain storm. What we are going to be very clear is every business is changing. And you'll say, well, how come? And the important thing to think about is when the pandemic hit and when there was nothing left, we had to the consumer demanded a couple of things. Consumers said, are you relevant for me? That's why if you're Clorox, you are relevant because I needed the wipes. Are you resilient? Meaning, can you make it work for me? Can you get it for me? And when Clorox couldn't make it, people went and started their own microbreweries and start making sheets themselves, right? Wipes themselves. So 3 things became very, very critical. Any supply chain going forward needs to be relevant, meaning, are they giving you the stuff? Can we trace the stuff so that I can match the ESG commitments I've made to Wall Street and to the public at large? So am I working in the circular economy? Am I building and not destroying the planet? So a couple of interesting things. The pandemic hits, the climate change crisis is pretty acute, and the consumers stop trusting you. Okay? So going forward, if you cannot do all 3 things, that supply chain is going to be so inefficient. Even if it is cost-wise the lowest cost supply chain, consumers will not buy and you will lose trust. So losing trust with the consumer will kill no matter how efficient is your supply chain is. So transparency, providing data, this is absolutely the most important thing that one needs to have. And now when we talk about supply chain, every person tells me it's AI, it's ML, it's IoT, it's IIoT, it is algorithms, all of those things. But in supply chain, the challenge is not all of those. The challenge is about business model innovation. When the pandemic hit, if you really look at it, restaurants, which is at the lowest end of the thing, did not get customers, but had delivery of groceries and stuff like that come in. So how did they manage? Some of them became omni-channel, meaning they started selling takeaways, they started selling their groceries, they started digitizing their environment. So all of a sudden, you didn't need bus boys and table waiters. You needed packaged goods and you needed an electronic way of ordering. So every restaurant that survived the pandemic changed its business model and changed the underlying infrastructure and technology. So much so, companies like Square, Hive, Gusto, they all started, Toast, they all started growing fast. And 2/3 of the restaurant industry died, but 1/3 grew very, very efficiently and very good. They used technology, but more importantly, they understood their business model change. They're not expecting people to walk in and sit at the table and for the restaurant to swipe the table and feed them, but people were ordering on the phone and picking it up. And that, I think, is a business model change. And if you look at across industry, you'll see a lot of industries changed business model or added new business model. So what is this going to do? Where are we going next in the future? I'm not worried about supply chain planning that I've been doing with SAP, APO, IBP, any of these 09 technologies like Kinaxis. They're all still yesterday's problem. What is coming up in the future? This is my thinking. It's going to become a network of networks, meaning supply chains are not longer going to be linear from one country, China, Vietnam, India, all the way to the US West Coast or US East Coast or Europe and vice versa, going the other way. It is going to be some of the products are going to be made locally. Some of the products are going to be assembled locally. Some of the products are, so the network of networks. So you're operating in a production network, you're operating in a distribution network. All of these are intermingling. Same analog interfaces at a lot of places that we have seen since time immemorial. I think the way we will see this is it's becoming a full network of networks. So that means we now need new technology, new algorithms, new applications, all of those things. And those things have to be built because we are going to have to build it on new technology. Just like we built applications on TCP/IP in the early 80s from the DARPANET protocol, today we'll have to build it on blockchain or things of that nature. So we can trace and tell the customer that they really actually used a recycled product, plastic, and the customer can trust you by looking at the data. So if you're a producer and you're trying to be the OEM and saying you're recycling 25% of your plastic is recycled from the ocean, you better have proof. So the network of networks, everything is a network and the networks have to communicate. We today see this in where companies, very simple thing, take a procurement cycle. If your company is using a procurement software like Ariba or Coupa, but the supplier is using, each supplier uses something different. When you interact and collaborate with them, you have to deal with that network effect. So from a data point of view, from an algorithm point of view, you have to continuously help put that together. Another prediction is security is going to get worse before it gets better. Ransomware, hacking, cybersecurity, all of that. There is tons of work, tons of new stuff being built, but I'm not talking about hacking on the laptops and stuff like that. I think the security on your products that move from your network across the network, when your product moves out, you will not have any visibility. You don't today, but you will need to get eyes on the product. So security is both physical and digital is going to get worse. And IoT networks, which is all the grid and stuff like that, both from hacking and as well as old age. I mean, the governments are so inefficient that they have implemented systems, but they have not upgraded it, not kept up with it, not monitored it. So if something happens, these IoT networks will start to fail. So relative to that, we think network or networks is very simple stuff. You'll have 5G, you have lots of, so the problem with this network or networks is if you are a startup guy, you have to understand what is going on. Where can I find that inefficiency where everybody is doing analog that I can build a company, I can start a company, or I can join with a group of people to help start a company? Is it in maritime? Is it in wind? Is it in solar? Is it in storage? Is it in physical distribution? Is it in digital distribution? Is it in cloud delivery, cloud protection? So is it in total zero for COP26? How do I get to measure that? So all of those autonomous physical and digitally stuff that you do is becoming very interesting. So this is the really interesting thing in integrated business planning. As we talk about it, we today talk about planning cycle and execution cycle. The problem is the push-pull boundary between planning and execution is moving somewhat towards an execution to satisfy the customer, but the planning needs to become fine-tuned and fine-granular. The more interesting stuff is all this workforce that these companies had. So one of my largest clients that I've ever worked with had 1,500 planners for their base between Taiwan, Hong Kong, Germany, US, India. A lot of planners working all over the thing to move stuff. That kind of model is going to become very difficult to maintain and orchestrate. So the exception handling, most systems actually recommending what you should make, sell, like AI, ML thing will turn up. But then the execution may be analog. How do we build on it? So this is something like for a retail goods, we think you'll have big ERPs, but the important thing is the systems have to be relevant, resilient, and at the last mile, you'll have to have some sort of optionality. Do I get it through a drone? Do I get it through a truck? Do I get it digitally? Do I get it through a third-party affiliate? Do I go pick it up? So those kind of every aspect of the supply chain, from logistics to planning to demand, will have optionality. And so if you create a company focusing on that, each one area, it could work. It's not a zero-sum game. A lot of time in India, we all think how to if I build this planning algorithm, somebody else is building. No, it's not a zero-sum game. You can actually create new ideas because this network of network, a lot of interfaces, a lot of communication that needs to happen. Okay, a lot of profitability and opportunity. So here is a visual of what
I think so. We should start addressing the questions.
Yes. Yeah. This is the last slide.
Oh, okay. Sure.
I timed it. Okay. So this tells you how we at Accenture think about the future. In the future, it's a supply chain of one. It's a last mile optionality. We talk about 5G, solar, autonomous vehicles, ML, AI. All of these pieces have to go into that same supply chain trade routes that were formed in the 15th century or 5th century. So I think a lot of opportunities that are going to happen. Okay. So, and a couple of interesting companies that I'm personally involved in supply chain. Finboot, where we are looking at using blockchain to track stuff. Resilink for resilience on the supply chain. Era, CEO is doing thing. Plato is a company that is creating shoes in India, just launched. The delivery is digital, and the circular economy. They're using circular. Product is designed in Portland, and developed in Italy, made in Coimbatore, delivered through Amazon for the Indian market. So that's the supply chain thing. They just launched in India. These are some of the companies I'm working with, right? So let's go to the questions, and I will take a look.
Sure, sir. So the first question was asked by Kalpana. As we move away from linear value chains to an interconnected web, how do we manage the entire value ecosystem? As there are multiple nodes where inefficiencies could arise, do you try to enforce common quality standards across the ecosystem? Unsure how that would be received.
So the industry that comes to mind is semiconductor, chipset industry. Quality and standards are very, very critical in that industry, and they enforce that. So even a small design firm that designs the chip that goes into your phone or into your stereo, they tell you exactly how to do in the network. The problem becomes as you go into larger consumer-driven models or chemicals or something, you have to rely on specs and properties and partners who are not at that level of standard. So typically in high-tech manufacturing and semiconductor manufacturing, linear supply chains have always used calls. So I cannot make, in Apple's case, that chip that Apple made at TSMC can only be used in this particular laptop, not in the high-end M1. The M1 laptop can use a different chip made in a different facility. So that is how they are managing it and controlling it. And I think it's worked well. So, all right.
Another question is, how do you maintain flexibility while maintaining an asset-light supply chain with some dependence on third parties? How do you also incorporate digital transformation of such distributed supply chains?
Okay. This is two parts. So the flexibility on when you are asset light, typically almost all the tech guys are asset light. Even Apple, they don't have manufacturing facility. It's Foxconn, right? So the way you do asset light environment, and in Europe, for example, the company SEO, it's a robotic fleet management company. Don't own asset, they own the service. So what you need to do is create contingencies across the network. So if you have Foxconn as your environment builder, you also have Flextronics. So that's until you level your supply chain maturity is at level 4, you maintain dual sources of supply or environment. You with this, see, the old way of doing distributed digital transformation was send them an MRP run for requirements planning, and you would say, can you send me these parts? This is my forecast. Today, what we are doing is, I did a project at Microsoft where we put in Ariba, a supply chain collaboration product, and we went for Xbox and Surface laptops, Surface Pros. We work directly with the customer and the partner. So Microsoft tells its partner, Pegatron, here's how many Xboxes I need. And they collaborate in real time. It's not a fax. It's a same document that we are exchanging and working. So it's all digital. So what it did was it took what used to take a month work of onboarding a supplier and 4 months of qualifying the supplier, shrunk to 4 weeks of qualifying and 1 week of onboarding. So literally we took away supply chain. So there is technology that you have to use, but before the technology, you have to understand the product process flows completely.
True, sir. So the next question is, could you elaborate on how you think the current supply chain infrastructure will transition to solution model described on this slide? How do you think adoption will be driven?
So the supply chain infrastructure changes with every year, pieces of it get changed, right? Whether we looked at it algorithmically or using the cloud. I think the infrastructure is going to change primarily with technology. Blockchain is a very, very important technology. We have not even seen anything near. I mean, people like blockchain, they think it's all crypto. I think we are going to see tremendous use. So fintech, this Finboot. Finboot is a company in London and Barcelona, and they have built on blockchain an application generator called Marco. But they have, more importantly, they have built a product. So the largest Spanish oil company has built wants to track a barrel of synthetic oil, which is made from recycled plastic, throughout their new supply chain. So they are using blockchain to track that origination from the recycled plastic all the way to consumption. And that is the technology that we'll have to use, because regular standard way of calculating whether you're using Mongo, any of these new track and trace stuff or sticking a tag on it is not going to work. So adoption will be driven when consumer. Again, if the consumer wants a circular economy and wants to see recycled product, wants to take care of that, the producers and the OEMs will do this. And I think that COP26, the millennial generation, that's who will drive that.
Great, sir. The last question for today is, given how rapidly business models seem to be changing as the consumer demands evolve, how should companies try to keep up with their underlying infrastructure change, especially on a continuous basis?
The two things that are happening, business models change, and the reason why the cloud is growing fast is because one of the reasons is this, right? If you have your own data center, if you have your own compute environment, if you have your own technology environment, if you have your own asset, you cannot seem to change fast enough. Okay. That's why you see in tech, a lot of the asset light move to the cloud, move to the environment. And so that's really the end of the thing. Business models change. There is a book by Alexander Osterwalder. If you all love MBA students like it, you should look at it. It's called Business Model Innovation. He uses a business canvas and value stream mapping. Those two things tell you why and how this business model change. How is it happening? It is always the change actually technically lands in the cloud environment today, because you're not waiting for HP to make a product to sell to you and your IT teams to put it in. You're now going to Amazon and saying, I want this kind of compute, I want this kind of storage. So all of a sudden, new business models become much more easily accessible. And so you can think about new business model and not think about the capital cost of deploying that business model. You can buy it as an operating cost. That's really what it is.
Great, sir.
Right.
So I think so those are the questions for today. Thank you so much for gracing our event and giving us so much of information and wisdom from your experience throughout the time in industry. We'd like to close the session now
Okay.
with a short video, again from our sponsors.
Thank you very much. Thanks for all the questions. You can always reach out if you need anything. Thanks.
Thank you, sir.
नहीं लगी ना तो शादी करा देंगे. Thanks to Hirect, where I could directly chat with the startup founders and get a job I deserve. Mom told me about.
I think so that's it. Thank you, sir, for the session. We'll
Thank you.
close the session.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.